me back to the Fantasy Fair. And for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Huckleberry Hax, and you might know me from such metaverse-related projects as AFK, the detective novel set in Second Life, or possibly my science fiction machinima Stonewall, which came out a couple of years ago. And before I get going, I'm just going to do my little self-promotional bit and pop my website address into chat just in case anyone would like to find out about any of the other things that I've been involved in. So as you said, I'm going to read from my work in progress, which is a piece of speculative fiction, I believe the term in vogue is at the moment. And it does indeed involve the issue of transhumanism, of being transferred to a digital state and existing in a metaverse. This novel, which I'm hoping to, it kind of already exists in its first draft. I want to polish it a bit over the next year, and it serves as a sequel to a novel that I released last year, Virtual Thursday. And it also exists in the same universe as a book which I released a few years back then called Beside an Open Window. But then I had uh, uh, an urgent desire to change its name and turned it into a novel called Thank You for Afterlifing with Us. So I'm going to read through. By all means, Dawny. Yeah, I'm going to read through. I think I've got enough time for the first four chapters. They're quite short chapters, so don't be horrified by that. I am intending to finish by 3 p.m. At the latest, and if I'm not on target, then we'll just have to finish it at three chapters. But I think four would be nice because of where the story gets to, and well, see what you think. So this is chapter one of Love is a Corrupted Data Stream. I exist. That's all I can tell you. I can't say if I'm real or unreal, alive or artificial, a conscious entity or a clever simulation. I don't know the answer to any of these things. I do have memories of living, but these are the recollections of someone else, someone made from atoms and not electrons. The first few moments lasted for years. A void that wasn't a void, a darkness that wasn't a darkness. I was a grain of sand in a grain of sand sized universe with nothing beyond me but me. I felt nothing. Only my thoughts existed. Perhaps once you lay down in a sensory deprivation tank and marveled at how your brain, so accustomed to the onslaught of stimulation it is ordinarily bombarded with, could conjure up such sensory marvels from the merest of things. But your heart would still have been beating. Air would still have been filling your lungs. You would still have felt the presence of your arms and legs and head and body, and the tiniest movement of a finger or toe in the water would still have created the tiniest of sounds and the tiniest of physical sensations for your brain to interpret. I experienced none of this. When there is nothing, nothing at all, then time ceases to have meaning. Time cannot be experienced without some sort of stimulation. There's no way to mark its passing. In a tank, you would be able to sing a song and measure the time in verses, but if you have no mouth and no ears and no eyes and no nose and no head and no body, if the only thing that's left of you is your mind, disconnected from every channel that ever fed its information, then all that remains of now is the meager capacity of your working memory. A single thought can last seconds or hours or forever. My initial reaction was to panic. But what is panic without a heart to beat quickly? What is panic when you cannot gasp to fill your lungs? I both felt and did not feel the urge to throw up. I thrashed wildly, arms and legs that did not exist. My mind sending these instructions anyway out of nothing but sheer habit. A dizziness that I'd never felt before overcame me. I was sure I was going to die. This went on for but a moment, and it lasted forever. At some point, a thought occurred to me. Perhaps I actually was dead. Could this be some sort of purgatory? Could this be some sort of hell? But if I was dead, then why couldn't I remember the moment of my death? All I could remember was a conversation in a house on an island, a comfortable chair, a burning fire. All I could remember was feeling warm and sleepy, a cup, starting to slide from a saucer in my hand. Jade, I had said. Catch me. Jade. My mind told my non-existent lips and tongue and teeth to form the word. It wasn't enough to think her name. I needed to say it. I needed to hear it. I thought about her face, and I told myself that if there really was nothing to my existence, then there was also nothing to interfere with me seeing her. We see things in dreams, after all. I knew this wasn't a dream, but I also knew that I still had a functioning mind. I was less distracted by this point by the absence of my lungs. Somehow I had gotten used to not breathing. See her, I told my mind. It was hardly anything at first, a patch of black that wasn't quite so black as everything else around it. But anything after nothing is something. It had no fixed state. It shifted and changed like a cloud. Over time, it could have been seconds, it could have been years, the patch became brighter, warmer, a warm haze like the haze you see when you shut your eyes but still look. Is that you, Jade? I asked the nothingness. Where am I? What am I? I reached out with my non-existent arms. The haze grew brighter. Remain calm. The two words appeared in bold, pixelated letters, a searing white that hurt to look at, but I had no eyelids to close and no head to turn away from them. They occupied the whole of my vision. The warm haze was obliterated by them. Remain calm. The phrase blinked on and off, and suddenly time became a thing again. After about 10 repetitions, a crude progress bar appeared below the words, a long, empty rectangle that started slowly to fill. When it was complete, both words and progress bar disappeared, and a video started to play in front of me. An image of English countryside, rolling hills, a narrow lane, a red postbox, a village store, a thatched cottage. Its front door opened and a man in his 50s looked out. "Hello," he said, with a friendly smile. "You're just on time. Why don't you come in?" The video paused and text appeared over the frozen image. Blink to enter the cottage. I didn't have eyelids, but I guessed that what I was supposed to do was make out as though I did. Amputees claim to have phantom limbs. I supposed that I had phantom eyelids. I blinked, and the video resumed. The camera moved through the open doorway, and the man showed me into a low-ceilinged living room that had two high-backed chairs positioned in front of a log fire. "Have a seat," he said, waving towards the chairs. Again, the video paused. "Look at the chair you would like to sit in and blink to select it." I focused on the chair to the left and sent my blink command. The camera moved me to the chair and sat, and turned me to watch the man as he took the other seat. "I expect this is all rather disorienting for you," he said. He was wearing black jeans and a white shirt, the two top buttons undone. His skin was dark, his hair was black. "I'm here to help you through the first stage of your adaptation and to reassure you that everything is okay. My name is Dev, by the way. Would you like to know some more about me? Or would you like me to get right to explaining what has happened?" Now I had two text options to choose from. Learn more about Dev, on the left, and find out what has happened, on the right. To hell with Dev. I looked to the right and blinked. He chuckled. "Yes, I rather suspected that would be your choice. As you probably worked out by now, you're in an induction program. We're offering you these choices to help you incrementally adapt your auto responses to this new environment. By the way, don't worry if you find any of these action requests too difficult. We're adjusting each request according to the speed with which you completed the previous one. So if you can't do what's being asked of you, then the request will time out and you'll be given an easier action to do instead. We'll get you there in the end, one way or the other. All right. Shall I continue?" The word nod appeared. I commanded my non-existent head to nod, and my view of the video shifted slightly up and back down again. It was somehow a slightly unnatural movement, as though I was witnessing the perspective of someone else's nod. I suppose that everyone nodded in a slightly different way to everyone else, and this was some sort of pre-programmed generic nod. Excellent. The camera view adjusted slightly, an edit, and Dev's expression changed a tiny bit. Ah, he said, I see you've already reached neck movement. Great progress. I'd like us to work on that a bit now. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten that you're waiting to be told what's going on, but people tend to want to feel normal as quickly as possible, so we're going to focus on that for a bit. I noted that this time I wasn't given any choice, so I waited. First things first, it's time to expand your view a little. Currently, you're looking at this scene as a two-dimensional video. We start out that way because it's a familiar thing to look at, but it's actually a 3D recording. So let's start by adding in the extra dimension. Dev waved his hand across his face, and depth appeared. Everything turned solid. The transition made me momentarily dizzy. Great. I should add that it's also a 360 recording, and your head movement has now been fully enabled. Try looking to your right. Blink when you see the grandfather clock. I turned my head, and my rectangular view of the world moved with me. I found the grandfather clock tick-tocking to my right. It reminded me of an office someplace and a woman who told me to steal something, a distant dream I couldn't hold on to. The clock was next to a tall bookcase that was packed full of non-fiction titles. I wanted to look behind me, but the bookcase was about as far as I could go. I turned back at the clock. I looked back at the clock and blinked. Good work. Feel free to look around the room as much as you want. When you're ready to continue, just return to my face and blink. It was a quaint country cottage, a cosy, comforting stereotype. I doubted that the details were of any importance. I went straight back to Dev and blinked. He chuckled again. Just get on with it, Dev, right? Yeah, I'd feel the same way too. Okay, the next step is a biggie, so prepare yourself. I'm going to transition you to a full 3D immersive environment that's an exact replica of this living room. It'll take a few seconds to do this, so your vision will be blanked out whilst it happens. I felt panic within me, not the void again, not the nothingness. Dev had anticipated this. Don't worry, we understand how unpleasant total sensory deprivation can be, so I'm going to keep talking to you through the transition. You'll still experience time passing. Just nod when you're ready to start. I drew a non-existent deep breath. Get it over with. I nodded. I like your determination, Dev said with a smile. Okay, blanking in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The room disappeared. I'm still here, he continued. I'm still sitting right in front of you. We're transferring you over to the new environment right now. Let me tell you something about it. When it appears, you'll no longer be looking at me in the room through a window, but you'll actually be inside it. You'll be able to look all around you just like normal, and once you've adjusted, we'll get straight to work in your gross motor movements so you could stand up and walk around again. Mid-word, Deb's voice got cut off. At the same moment, the living room appeared around me, just as he had promised it would. But Dev was gone, and the room was empty. Chapter 2. I had a body now. I looked down at it and instinctively knew it was not mine. I held my hands up to examine them, and only after completing this movement did I realize I'd just completed a movement. My arms felt too light. Have you ever done that thing where you stand in the doorway and press your arms against the frame really hard for at least a minute, and then step forward and feel them floating upwards? That's what holding my hands up felt like. I looked at my stranger's fingers, a little too long to be mine, a shade too pale, and a nail varnish I would never have chosen, and waggled them a little. They moved, but it felt like they were still. You don't notice the air around your body until it's gone, and the very faint resistance it creates is gone with it. I pressed the fingers of my right hand into the palm of my left and felt a pressure that's hard to put into words. It was nothing like anything you'd call touch. It was Something internal, like a signal, like a block, like a boundary of some description. It was almost like the buzz you feel when you tap an icon on a phone, but not quite. I moved my fingers across my palm and just felt more of that signal. There was no sense of texture at all. The room did indeed appear exactly as it had appeared on the video. Somehow, though, it was less real. I looked at the armrests of the chair I was sitting in. They were upholstered in a fawn-coloured weave, and there was something unusual about it. I studied it for several moments before it came to me. Minute variations in the fabric's weave and colouring, the tiny little imperfections we would never ordinarily notice in something real, could be seen all over both arms. It was a repeating texture, perfectly seamless so that the edges of each tile couldn't be seen, but at some subconscious level the whole effect was immediately artificial. I looked at the fabric close up, and when my nose was just a couple of inches from the surface, I started to see the individual pixels. I decided to stand up. It was a complicated process. I had to think consciously about all the things I would ordinarily do to complete such a movement. The muscle memory was there, of course. My new limbs did exactly what I automatically ordered them to do, but the feedback was all wrong. Movements like standing up are not a single movement at all, but a sequence of movements. You put your hands on the armrest to push yourself up. You don't start the pushing until you know you've got good purchase. When my open palms pressed into the fake fabric of the armrests, they felt that same sense of undefinable boundary that my fingers had felt against my left hand, and immediately that set off an alarm that something was wrong and the rest of the process broke down. The things we do automatically are based on a set of assumptions, and when the data comes back that those assumptions are invalid, then the routine collapses and you're left sitting in an armchair with no idea how to get up. I could have overridden the alarm and pressed down anyway, but that would have been as unnatural to me as the act of intentionally walking off a step without stepping down. You're being stupid, I told myself. Plenty of chairs don't have arms. Think stool. Think futon. Think those deck chairs with the canvas arms that you would never push down on. Deck chairs. I hate deck chairs. But I pushed that thought aside and focused on leaning forward so that more of my unfelt weight was going through my legs. I stood. It was a hesitant, wobbly stand, but it was a stand. Now I felt that sense of boundary, that odd signal that communicated pressure, but at the same time conveyed no actual sense of pressure, coming up through my feet. I felt light, as though my body had no actual weight at all. For a split second, when I was rising, I worried that when I completed the movement, I might just keep on going and take off into the air, fly up into the ceiling. But my feet remained stuck to the ground, and my body remained in exactly the state that gravity would expect it to remain in. I took a hesitant first step, like you do when you're walking down a flight of uneven steps. I watched my foot through every millimetre of its journey, knowing now that the physical feedback I'd get from the action just wouldn't be enough on its own. And then another step, and then another step. What was most remarkable about it all, I thought to myself, was just how quickly I appeared to be adapting. The brain is an incredible device, said Dev. The shock of his voice nearly sent me tumbling to the ground. He was right back in his chair again, smiling smugly at his deceptive motivational act. It adapts so quickly to its new environment. New connections form, neuroplasticity. You're making excellent progress. In a couple of days, you'll be running around as though you've never known anything different from this. He waved his hand briefly on the word, this. And what the hell is this? I tried to say in reply. But instead of words, a distorted electronic noise came out of me. It startled me, and that caused me to sway a little. Balance was something I had to constantly think about, though it felt like if I did lose this battle, I would merely float to the ground. Dev's face seemed to flicker slightly. Aha, he said. You're attempting speech. Excellent. Let's do some work on that. I'd advise you to sit down first, though. It'll be cognitively a great deal harder for you if you try to speak while standing. Free up that capacity and sit. But take your time coming back to the chair. There's no rush. I took 3 steps back to the chair, did a cautious 180, and lowered myself down like I was doing a squat. until I felt its surface pressing in that, not actually feeling like it was pressing, against my behind. Then I let myself flop back. Energetically, Dev leaned forward. You'll be getting the picture by now, I'm sure. We start with small individual movements and then build them up in complexity. The first thing I want you to do is to form with your mouth the shape you would make to say, ah. Don't try to make the sound itself yet. Just make the shape of your lips. I pushed myself forward, subconsciously mirroring his position, and focused on moving my lips I could not feel. Very quickly I came to realize I had no idea whatsoever what sort of shape they were forming on my face. Anticipating this frustration, Dev smiled kindly and said, "Not quite so easy as moving forward a foot you can look at, is it? The sensory information you're missing right now is called proprioception. In layperson's terms, all the internal feedback you get from your muscles ordinarily when you move them. Basically a whole extra sense. It's how people are able to do stuff like walk in the dark. You've been compensating for your lack of proprioceptive feedback so far by using your vision in combination with the extremely rudimentary sense of contact provided by the system interface. But of course you can't see your lips without a mirror. Of course you still know how to make the R shape. You're probably doing so right now, but you can't be sure without feedback. So I'm going to hold up a mirror in front of you. Now don't be alarmed, but the face you're going to see isn't the face you're used to seeing in a mirror. What you'll be looking at is an avatar representing you, and in time you'll be able to change your avatar to look however you want it to, including your real life self, if that's what you'd like to look like in here. Poor sweet Dev, thinking I didn't know what an avatar was. I rotated my right hand quickly in that hurry things up fashion, knowing full well that he was probably some sort of recording, but hoping just the same there might be someone watching who could hit the fast forward button. And now for a bit of metaverse magic, Dev said with a wink. He traced the rectangle in the air and it turned into a gilt-framed mirror. I noticed he'd sneaked in the word metaverse just then, no doubt a primer for the big reveal due soon that I was connected somehow to a state-of-the-art virtual world, except I'd figured this out for myself the moment I'd looked at my stranger's hands, because that sense of disconnect had brought immediately to mind the experience years ago of looking at my avatar body through a VR headset in Second Life. Though whatever this place was, it was light years ahead of SL. I had no idea how this interface Dev had spoken of had managed to isolate me so completely from my real-world senses. I wondered where my body was right now. The face that looked back at me was stunning in its photorealistic detail, though hardly exciting in any other respect. I was white, blonde, freckled, blue-eyed, and boring. It would do for now. I leaned closer to the mirror and got back to work on my R shape, using the visual feedback to help me position my lips just right. It was awkward, but no more so than moving my feet had been earlier. When you're happy with the shape, just blink, Dev told me. I fiddled a little longer and also used this moment to experiment with wiggling my eyebrows and scrunching my nose. Then I blinked. Good. Now then, whilst you hold that shape, I want you to focus on making an R sound. Once again, you're not going to get the internal feedback you're used to hear. First, you won't feel the sensation of air moving from your lungs and out of your mouth, as I'm certain you've already ascertained for yourself. The interface doesn't simulate the respiratory system. Second, you won't feel the vibration in your mouth that you're used to feeling when you make this sound. Try to put these things out of your mind and focus on making the sound as though you can feel them anyway. That might sound counterintuitive, but give it a go. I gave it a go and was immediately discouraged by the sound I started making, which was nothing like an R and more like an and an odd sort of electronic at that. Keep making that sound, Dev said. Don't worry, you're not going to run out of breath. I'm going to res a control board in front of you now with a set of dials on it. By the way, res is the word we use when we make something appear in this world. Yes, yes, Dev. Everyone knows what res means. The control board, brushed aluminium, appeared in front of me. It was fixed in the air like the mirror just above it. There were 4 dials labelled volume, pitch, timbre, and allophone. These dials will change the sound you're making right now. I want you to experiment with them until you get the sounds that sounds closest to you, like how you would say "ah" at a normal speaking volume. It's not going to sound exactly like you, by the way, because we haven't yet applied your voice print. That part comes later. Blink twice when you're happy with the sound. This took an infuriatingly long time to achieve and included a not insubstantial period during which I was no longer certain what "ah" actually sounded like. The dials themselves were frustratingly difficult to manipulate at first, but just like walking, it became easier the more I did it. Eventually, I got an acceptable "ah" and blinked twice. Great! Dev didn't seem the least bit bored. He had to be a recording. Now stop making the sound and close your mouth and then say "ah." "Ah," I said. Happy with that? "Ah." Okay, now let's get to work on the sound, on the "oo" sound, as in move. Just let me know when you're ready to get going. To my right, the grandfather clock chimed 5 p.m. It was going to be a long night. "Ah," I said. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, I said, rolling my eyes as I did so. The grandfather clock chimed 2 a.m. Perfect, said Dev. You've made amazing progress, and now it's time to rest. Your brain needs sleep in here just as much as it does in the physical world. Wait, I said. You promised me some sort of explanation about this place. I didn't feel in the least bit tired. I'm sorry, Dev said. You've made a response I'm unable to pass. You do realize I'm an AI, right? Not a very good one, I'll admit. But you have to admit a very charming one. It was like reading the packaging banter of a woke yogurt carton. I stood up and called out, Is anybody real monitoring this conversation? I want an explanation now. I paced up and down the living room impatiently, another skill I'd mastered during my various speech breaks over the last 9 hours. So I'm going to count back from 5, and then you'll be placed in a sleep state, Dev told me, appearing completely undistracted by my pacing. Sleep state? I echoed. You mean returns to real life, right? I'm duly impressed by this environment, but enough's enough. Either get someone in here who can answer my questions or unplug me from whatever fucking machine you have me plugged into. I need to eat. I need to physically move. I probably need to pee. Do you want me peeing in your machine, Dev? Well, do you? At 3, you'll start to feel sleepy, Dev continued. You might want to sit down, but it's not essential. Your avatar will be moved to a comfortable pose whilst you sleep, ready for when you wake up. I felt panic start to rise up in me. Not the void, I said. I actually kneeled in front of him. Please don't put me back in that. Please, Dev. This he responded to. Don't worry, he said softly. It'll be just like sleep, the way you remember it. He was right. I dreamt of being whole again, of having a body, of touching things. I dreamt of Jade. I'm falling, I told her. Catch me. Chapter 3. I woke immediately, like a light switch being turned on. I was lying on a bed and wearing pajamas. It took a few seconds for my day with Dev to come back to me and to realize I was still inside this artificial environment somehow. That explained the lightness of my body. It felt no difference to lie down than it did to sit or stand. My learning from the day before was not yet fluent, and it took me a couple of minutes to devise a sequence of movements that would get me back on my feet. The bedroom was old and low-ceilinged. I was still in the cottage. I went to a tiny window, noting that the aged wooden floorboards creaked when I walked across them, and looked out over a small garden. Beyond it was a field in which sheep were grazing. Morning light cast a crisp shadow. I opened the window, and the cool freshness of the hour didn't enter. There was a full-sized mirror in the room and a chest of drawers next to the bed. I stood in front of the mirror and examined my appearance. Light blue pajamas with a repeating pineapple design and not a crease in them to suggest I'd been sleeping. My similarly uncrumpled hair was tied back in a ponytail. This would not do. I blinked, and immediately a small menu popped up beside the mirror. Edit body, edit outfit, exit. When I looked directly at the menu option, it turned orange. I held Edit Body in focus and blinked. Quite literally, in the blink of an eye, my pajamas disappeared, and in the mirror reflection, my body was outlined in blue. An array of new menus, buttons, and sliders appeared around the mirror, taking up a good percentage of the surrounding white wall space. I spent a few minutes examining them, finally coming to rest on Apply New Skin. I blinked and a new window opened showing a variety of thumbnailed bodies in various tones. One of them had a red box around it and text underneath read, RL Body Scan, November 2018. That's right, I thought to myself. It was November. Why did that somehow feel like news to me? I selected the red box and my real-life skin slowly crept over my body, replacing the pale default. This means someone had scanned my naked body in real life? Was that something I'd given my consent to? It troubled me that I couldn't recall any of this happening, and in some subconscious corner of my mind it troubled me that this troubledness seemed uncharacteristically mild. Next, I found the body shape menu and applied a similar real-life scan to my proportions. I grew a couple of inches and gained a few more pounds than I'd hoped might be quite so visibly apparent. For a moment, I was tempted to play with the body fat slider, and the muscle definition control looked interesting too. But I reminded myself that I wasn't intending my stay in whatever new universe product this was to be any longer than necessary, and closed down the shape system to look for something that resembled my hair. No real-life scan of this appeared to have been made, so I settled on a dark crew cut. I felt in a combative mood. Accordingly, when I found the outfits menu, which was disparagingly minimal, I might add, I settled for a pair of army fatigues, Dr. Martens boots, and a blank tank top. I examined myself in the mirror. Yes, that would do. I blinked on exit and went downstairs. The living room was empty, but in the little kitchen behind the staircase, I found a woman sitting at a table by the window. She looked up when I entered and beamed at me. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "I slept," I replied. She looked about 30, but there was something about her movement when she stood that suggested an older person. She was wearing blue jeans and a loose peasant's top and some dark green pumps. She had a kind face. I forced myself to ignore that. "Are you another AI?" I asked. "No, Emma," she replied, smiling. "I'm a real person, just like you." She stood in front of me and took my hands in hers. "So here we are. What do you think of our little world so far?" I pulled my hands away. Well, I'd like to know just how I came to be in it, for one thing. "Yes, we'll get to that, I promise." She quickly changed the topic. "I see you've recreated your real-life appearance." "I take it you haven't," I replied. "Well, no. I'm quite a bit older than this out in the physical world. But why shouldn't I go with a younger version of me in here? We all wish we were young again, deep down. Would you like to sit outside?" Inside, outside, I waved my hands, taking in her whole little world in one indifferent swipe. It's all the same to me. "I understand what you're saying," she said, opening the back door for me. "But it really helps in here if you can buy into the illusion." Outside, the kitchen was a little terrace paved in irregularly sized slate. We sat down at a wrought iron table, its white paint flaking away. When you look at a painting of a rose, the image evokes the memory of its smell, does it not? I looked at her. "I know you, don't I? You know things about memory." "Yes, you do know me," she replied, "and yes, I do." "Why can't I remember how I came here?" "It'll come back to you. You're still in the process of transitioning. That has to be done gradually. You've already raced through motor adaptation faster than anyone has ever managed it before. Take a moment, Emma. There's no rush in here." "How do you know my name?" She looked at me. "What's the last thing you remember?" I frowned. "I was on a plane, I think. A little one. Some old guy was taking me somewhere, but I can't remember who he was or where we were going." "He was bringing you to me," she said. Look, I told her, I'm starving hungry. When are you going to let me out of this place to eat? You only think you're hungry because you're accustomed to eating after you've woken up, she said. Pretty much everything in the brain works that way. Association, association, association. The trick is to keep those associations active. You'll get used to it. I sighed, an articulation of the sound. Okay, fine. Tell me about this world then. Oh, I'm not some sort of sales rep, if that's what you're thinking. And as for all this, she waved her hand in a similar way to the way I'd waved mine in the kitchen. I had very little to do with its construction. Not my area of expertise, I'm afraid. It is impressive, though, don't you think? I shook my head. Impressive? It's fucking incredible. She laughed, and there was genuine joy in that sound. I realized it was one I hadn't learned how to make myself yet, but then again, I hadn't really had anything yet to laugh about. Okay, she said, it's fucking incredible. Yes, well, it needs to be. And this, I promise you, is just the beginning. One day we'll work out all the other sensory inputs: tactile, olfactory, gustatory, thermoception, proprioception, vestibular. One day we'll sit out here and smell the fresh air and feel the rising sun warming our faces and eat as many croissants and drink as much coffee as we want to. I couldn't help but smile. Nice, but I doubt that will happen in my lifetime. That's where you're wrong, she replied. You might live longer than you think. I looked out of the lawn and the fields beyond. How far does this go? She followed my gaze. Actually, I've never ventured any further than this garden. This is kind of a welcome area. I haven't been here since my own transition. She stood up. Want to find out? Sure. We walked across the lawn and climbed over a stile. So how long is it since you transitioned? I asked her as we strode out across the field. About a year in the real world, she replied. Nearly 4 for me. Time works differently in here. So that's a statement right there that's going to need some explanation. She laughed. It's complicated. Essentially, the computers we use for this are extremely fast and can speed the brain up. It's perfectly safe. How much do they get sped up? We run them at a factor of 6 right now. But during my first few months, it was half that. We were still in the late testing stage back then. I stopped and a nearby sheep wandered over to us. Are you telling me you've been hooked up to this place permanently all this time? She hesitated and then said, in a manner of speaking. You're holding back something, I told her. Of course I am, sweetheart. We'll get to it all eventually, I promise. Sweetheart? The sheep looked at me and issued a half-hearted bleat. I reached out to stroke it, and it backed away from me in alarm. I suppose you're going to tell me you have a real sheep hooked up to this machine, I said. She smiled again. No, that's just a simulation. It turns out sheep behavior isn't all that hard to simulate. Who knew? I said. Indeed. I looked at her and it came to me. Trish, I said. Your name is Trish. That's right, she replied. And do you know who I am? Yes, I said, but it doesn't make any sense. I think you're my mother. She put her arms around me, and this time I didn't pull away. See? My hair. You don't feel it, but you feel it. Chapter 4. We found the boundary after 10 minutes of walking. It was disappointingly crude. I was expecting some sort of invisible wall, after which the inaccessible fields and hills continued on beautifully, all the way to the horizon. Instead, we came to a very obvious 2D bitmap. Trish said, also appearing unimpressed. I expect probably no one ever ventured out this far before. Inductees tend to stay at the cottage, I've heard. Where do they go after that? Wherever it is they've been assigned to. Such as? Oh, we have a number of sections, all with their own projects. Most of them are scientific. There's a big push on computing right now. Doing what? Exactly. Designing faster computers. Everything we want to do in here relies on computer speed. And what is it, I asked, that you want to do in here? Create a better world, of course. So this isn't some sort of game then? Not all virtual environments are games, dear, she said. This isn't like Second Life. I opened my mouth to protest and then thought better of it. I reached out to touch the bitmap and got that sense of contact through my fingers. That man on the plane, I said. He was my father, wasn't he? Yes, Trish said. His name was Tony. And then a whole chunk came back. I was on a case, a hidden city, a real place that spread out all over the country, maybe all over the world. A house in this town, a building in the next, all linked up via the internet. A resident's next door neighbour might live 1,000 miles away. A community doesn't have to be geographically based in order for it to be a community, she said. Except this was geographically mapped. Every house belonged to a virtual street and had a house number, and no one knew anything about it except for the residents themselves. Well, she said, with a wry smile, you knew about it. It was inevitable it would leak out eventually, though we'd sort of hoped we might have a bit more time remaining. How did I learn about it? I asked her. You were recruited by the British government. They found out that you were my daughter. I only remember bits and pieces. Is that deliberate? She spoke carefully. There's a lot for you to take in. It's better if you do so slowly. It's better if you learn your way around here first. The city, I said. It's called New Morecambe. Yes. You have a position in the university. That's right. I travelled to Scotland? Yes, to the Shetlands. So, is this place some sort of extension to New Morecambe? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Very few of the residents know of it. We started back towards the cottage. The population of New Morecambe is just over 6,000 people, but the residents in here number fewer than 60. The long-term aim is for it to replace the distributed city infrastructure as the main method for interaction for residents. But right now it acts as a research establishment. We call it the Mountain. It's existed for about 18 months in real-world time. The Mountain, I repeated. That felt like new information. It reaches higher than anything ever made by humankind before, she said, or something like that. Believe it or not, it took a committee a whole week to come up with that. Into the heavens, I said. She looked at me. Yes, that's too. We entered back into the small wood we'd walked around the first time. Out of instinct, I reached out to brush my hands over the tops of some tall ferns. It passed right through them. Before I entered the cottage, I said to Trish, there was this endless nothingness. She nodded. Pretty unpleasant, right? Try existentially terrifying. Yeah, I had that too, and I was expecting it. We have to induce consciousness for a short period whilst we hook up all the connections that need to be made. Believe it or not, that actually only lasted for a little over 4 minutes. The memory of that period had become vague up until that point, but now it started to come back to me. The absence of time, the haze I was trying by force of will to turn into something I could look at. I wonder what it is about you that's enabled you to progress so quickly, Trish was saying, but I'd stopped walking. She turned to look at me. What is it? Jade, I said. A panicked look passed momentarily across her face. You're forcing things, darling. Try not to think too much about past things. I stared at her. Well, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Is she okay? Has something happened to her? Is that what this is all about? What are you hiding from me, Trish? No, 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 she said, her palms wide. That's not what I meant at all. Jade is fine, I promise. It's just important that you complete your transition in a calm state and thinking about loved ones, well, it complicates things. I'd be a good deal more calm if Jade was here right now instead of you, I told her. I think it's time you started telling me exactly why I'm here. You're here because you're my daughter, she cried. Enough of this, I demanded. I want out of this place right now. Unplug me from this fucking thing. She sighed and threw up her arms helplessly. Emma, go to sleep, she said, and everything went black. I woke up back in the bedroom. It was night. The curtains were drawn. The bedside lamp cast a dim glow across the room. Trish was sitting in an armchair where the mirror had been before. You can't return to the physical world, Emma, she said. You don't belong there anymore. This is your home now. And that's the end of chapter 4 and the end of this excerpt. So just to remind you, that was the opening 4 chapters of Love is a Corrupted Data Stream, which is my current work in progress, hopefully for release in 2023. We shall see.
That was fantastic. I love that. You say it's sort of the third in the series.
Kind of. So a while back, I wrote this book, which, as I said earlier on, I renamed to Beside an Open Window, which is also set in the same virtual world that's kind of the same virtual world that this is set in. That was set in the future. And then Virtual Thursday was a book that I wrote last year or released last year. That was set in 2018. And this is, as you can tell, this is straight away after that novel. It follows immediately on from Virtual Thursday. But events kind of play into a way that feed into Thank You for Afterlifing with Us. So the 3 books kind of go together, and I can't really say more than that without giving away any spoilers.
Well, at least it means we can go and get copies of the earlier ones.
Yes, well, yes, absolutely. So there's a few little references in the bit that I read there to the events of Virtual Thursday, which
Right.
they're not essential to. I wanted this book to be kind of standalone, but obviously it's
Mm.
nice to have a backstory if people want to read it. Yes, that came out last year, and then Thank You for Afterlifing is a slightly longer novel, which is also, yes, it's all on the website.
Of course, we have got a book table outside.
Oh yes,
Dawny, can you tell us, have we got copies of Huck's books outside?
I think you have.
Books.
Uh-huh. That's right. You can be forgiven for not learning loads of book names randomly.
But we can go and actually get them. What you do is you click on the book on the book table, and you get a
Ah,
copy.
nice.
You get taken to either the website or to Amazon, and you can buy a copy of the book.
Well, if you go to my website, um, I'll just put in my URL again. That's my website. Down the right hand side of the site, those novels are linked in, and you just have to scroll down a little bit. So let me put in the oh gosh, it's displaying slightly oddly. I wonder why it's doing that. So let me put in the Virtual Thursday link, which is the book that comes immediately before, just to do a little bit of the work for you. There you go. That's Virtual Thursday. And then this is, I'll put in Thank You for Afterlifing with Us. He's looking for it. There we go. There it is. So these are the 2 novels that kind of link in. But I will say also the AFK novels are also relevant because the character in the story that I've just been reading is the protagonist from the AFK novels. There are very little references made to the events of AFK, but yes, those events happened before for this character. And yes, so you can those books are well, they are in print, but they're pretty damn expensive, if I'm honest. So you can get them in Kindle for a heck of a lot less. And also, if you support me on Patreon, then I'm actually giving away PDF versions of the novels, special edition PDF versions to Patreon members. Um, um, so you can kind of get them all for extremely cheap that way, if PDF is your preferred format.
Are you still doing the podcast? Because last year you shared one of the Avatar Dining Club mysteries with us.
Yes, I am. I'm working. I'm working on the second season at the moment. So I've recorded 3 episodes, and I've got 3 more to record, and I won't release them until I've done them all because I'm very lazy at doing stuff like this, and so I don't want to kind of release 3 episodes and then have people waiting. I like to kind of do it week by week, throughout the season. So I'm hoping round about I don't know. By the end of May, I should have thought that the second season will be coming out. Oh, thank you for putting the Patreon link. But yeah, Patreon is a new thing for me. I'm curious about it and intrigued by it, and I like philosophy. But I think the free PDF, the PDF deal is I've kind of priced it at the kind of lowest possible tier. I think it's something like a pound a month or something like that. So it kind of works out as better value, if you like, than buying. So yeah, so new episodes of the Avatar Dining Club podcast will be coming soon-ish.
Excellent.
Okie doke.
Well, thank you so much for coming and reading. And I know we have the pleasure of your company again on Friday, when I'm really excited to see the new trailer.
Yeah, I'm very excited about Friday's event. So for those of you who've seen my Machinima movie, it's a feature-length science fiction Machinima movie called Stomar, which I released in 2020. And Caitlin Tobias, who's over on the right-hand side there, and I and a number of other actors have been working for 2 years now, coming up on the sequel to that film, which is going to be called Varheid. Apparently, I pronounced that word wrong. I apologise to any Dutch people. But Varheid is the sequel to Stomol, and we have the trailer premiering as a Fantasy Fair exclusive on Friday. It's going to be at 11 a.m. Jolie. So I'm really looking forward to everyone getting a glimpse of what the new film is going to look like, and getting some of people's reactions to that. So, yeah.
And we're actually interviewing one of your actors
on Wednesday. Yes, yeah. I mean, that was a tremendous find for us, to get AJ on board with that. She's playing one of the main roles in the film. She's probably sick to death of the endless filming sessions we've been doing since we recruited her last year. But yeah, a truly great asset to have as part of the team.
Yeah. Yes, we've got her in Harlequin and the Omega Hex too, which is being released on Sunday, the first episode.
Great.
Yeah, so she's been a busy actress.
Yeah, she has. Yeah, she's
tremendous.
Every which way.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I shall look forward to seeing you on Friday, Saffia.
I shall look forward to seeing you then, and look forward to Varheit, if that's the correct pronunciation.
I don't think it is, but I get it wrong as well, so don't worry too much about it.
Okay.
Oh, good enough, Kate says. Excellent.
Good.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
And now we're handing over to Aoife, who's going to introduce our next guest. It's a busy session over here. Huck, thank you so much.
And the first thing I need to do